Welcome. Welcome to Reformed Thinking.
Yeah,
We are genuinely thrilled that you are pulling up a chair and just sitting in with us today.
absolutely.
So we are all on the same page right out of the gate. You should know that we do not look at this as just another standard audio file for you to, play in the background while you do the dishes.
Right, definitely not.
We consider this a complete deep dive into the source material. You are the third person in the room with us right now, and we are talking directly to you. We want you to feel the weight and the hope of what we are unpacking today.
Mm.
So let's lay out the mission for our discussion. We have an incredible stack of notes and excerpts drawn from John Piper's book, The Hidden Smile of God.
It is quite a stack.
It really is. And specifically, we're looking at the intense affliction of three historical figures: John Bunyan, William Cowper, and David Brainerd.
Three heavy hitters.
It's very heavy. Our goal is to uncover how their massive, agonizing hardships actually produced a harvest of grace that aggressively challenges our modern Western views on comfort, on worship, and on the Christian mission.
Yeah.
We have a whole lot of ground to cover, so let's get right into it.
It is great to be here. And before we start pulling apart the specific lives of these three men, we really need to set a solid theological baseline.
That is a good idea.
Since we are adhering to Reformed theology in the Westminster Confession, our entire discussion today rests heavily on the understanding of God's total sovereignty over all of history.
Right.
We believe that God ordains whatsoever comes to pass, but looking closely at the material, what captures our attention is how God uses secondary causes to accomplish his massive sovereign sequences.
Yeah, that is the key.
Specifically, we are looking at the suffering of his saints. Their pain is not random. It is not an accident of nature. It is a purposeful instrument in the hands of a sovereign God who oversees all things. We are going to look at how he orchestrates these events across centuries.
Let me pause you there for just a second, because that is a massive theological concept.
It is.
When we talk about secondary causes in the context of the Westminster Confession, can we break that down into plain language?
Sure.
Because sometimes that phrasing can sound a bit like a seminary lecture, and I want to make sure we are all tracking. Are we basically talking about the everyday dominoes falling in our lives?
That is a brilliant way to frame it. Yes. Think of it like an unfathomably large room filled with dominoes.
Okay.
God is the primary cause. He is the one who designed the room, set up every single domino, and initiated the entire sequence. He is sovereign over the whole design.
Right.
But the secondary causes are the actual dominoes hitting each other. When a domino falls and strikes the one next to it, that physical strike is a real event. It causes a real impact.
It is not a fake collision?
Precisely. So when we talk about human suffering, the pain a person feels is a real secondary cause. God uses that specific painful domino falling to knock over another domino, which might lead to a massive blessing centuries later. The pain is real, the human choices are real, but they are all operating under the overarching primary sovereignty of God.
That makes perfect sense, and that leads right into the very first concept from Piper's book that we need to unpack. The source material begins with this absolutely striking phrase.
Oh, I know the one.
Quote, 10,000 effects follow from every motion of your hand.
Yeah.
When I read that line, I literally caught myself looking down at my own hands, just thinking about the thousands of invisible ripple effects happening every time I make a simple choice.
It is staggering to think about.
The author brings up an analogy from Clyde Kilby, who taught English literature at Wheaton College. He paints the picture of a pebble falling into a pond. We have all seen this happen. The pebble hits the water and it sends waves onward.
Right, basic physics.
Kilby points out that in the physical world, those waves eventually become invisible to the naked eye. Yet they never actually end. The motion just keeps pushing outward, displacing water infinitely. Piper uses this physical reality to make a point about the historical chains of cause and effect.
The physical physics of a pond is such a necessary visual for understanding what we call the God-wrought sovereign sequences of history.
Right.
When we see a physical pebble hitting the water, we grasp the basic mechanics. Water is displaced, energy transfers. But Piper asks us to consider the much greater mystery of the ripple effect in the realm of persons and spirits.
That is where it gets heavy.
If the hidden mechanics of a physical wave hold us in amazement, how much more should we be stunned by the spiritual chain of causation? We cannot see spiritual energy transferring, but it happens every single day.
Right.
This connects directly to the Apostle Paul's words in Romans chapter 11, verse 33, which the book quotes. How unsearchable are his judgments and how inscrutable his ways.
Unsearchable.
In Reformed thought, when we say God's judgments are unsearchable, we mean the sheer scale of his plotting and planning is too vast for the human mind to track.
We just cannot see it all.
We cannot trace the beginning of the wave, and we certainly cannot see where the wave finally stops. We are dealing with the tension of the physical mystery of causation versus the much greater invisible mystery of spiritual influence that cascades down through generations.
And the book gives us these incredible, unbroken chains of influence to prove the point.
They are amazing.
Let's look at the David Brainerd chain first. Brainerd was a man who suffered immensely, both physically and emotionally, which we will get into later. But his suffering acts as a pebble dropped into the pond. The book details how Brainerd's life ends up stirring the heart of a man named William Carey. Carey reads about Brainerd and is entirely moved to action.
He is compelled.
He becomes the father of modern missions, heading to India. And then Carey goes on to inspire John Newton. You might know John Newton as the man who wrote the hymn Amazing Grace.
Yes.
But the text points out that Newton looked at Carey and said he was more to him than a bishop or archbishop. He called Carey an apostle.
High praise.
And the ripples do not stop there. The material shows us that Carey also inspired Adoniram Judson, who took up missionary labors in Burma, facing unspeakable hardships himself.
Right.
It is an unbroken chain of influence spanning continents and decades, all starting with one sick man in the wilderness.
It is a staggering sequence. And to add another layer, consider the John Bunyan chain that the author highlights.
Oh, that one is so good.
Bunyan was a Puritan preacher in the 17th century who refused to stop preaching the gospel when the state demanded it.
He would not back down.
The book describes this agonizing moment where John Bunyan bends down, kisses his blind daughter Mary, whom he loved dearly, and then walks straight back to a damp, freezing prison cell in Bedford.
That breaks my heart.
He makes the agonizing choice to endure suffering rather than compromise his convictions. He is locked up for over a decade. He is suffering. But in that cell, he writes a story called The Pilgrim's Progress.
The pebble drops.
The pebble drops. Then, 3 centuries later, that specific story is translated into Chinese. The book notes that this translation gives immense courage to an underground house church pastor who is facing his own persecution under a hostile regime.
Ow.
The waves from a cold English jail cell crash onto the shores of 20th century China.
Or consider the William Cowper chain. The book describes how William Cowper, on some dark day 200 years ago, sitting in the grip of what we would now recognize as severe clinical depression, creates a cadence and a rhyme.
Yeah.
He forces himself to write a poem called God Moves in a Mysterious Way. And today, right now, a broken-hearted church sings those exact words, and hope awakens in the room.
The waves go on.
The waves go on. So what does this all mean for us? We have to discuss the concept that these men's afflictions were, as Piper states, not for naught.
Right.
But let me push back a little bit here, or at least play devil's advocate. What happens when a person is sitting in the absolute middle of suffering right now?
It is hard to see the waves.
They cannot see centuries into the future. They feel like their pain is utterly pointless. How does this concept of unseen ripples actually help someone who is currently drowning in despair?
That is the most human question we can ask, and it gets to the very core of why Piper wrote this material.
Okay.
When a person is in the middle of severe affliction, the most crushing aspect is often the sense of meaninglessness.
Yes, the lack of a reason.
The idea that this pain is happening for absolutely no reason is what drives people to total despair.
Yeah.
It is the feeling of being abandoned in a void.
Right.
But the argument here is that the pebbles dropped by Bunyan, Cowper, and Brainerd did not drop in vain. They did not drop in vain in their own lifetimes, nor in the centuries to follow.
They mattered.
What is happening is that God is actively breathing on the waters. Because of his sovereign oversight, those parched places in our modern lives are now being watered with the memories of their sustaining grace. Their affliction produced a yield that they could not possibly have foreseen from their prison cells or their sickbeds. It forces us to completely reevaluate how we view our own seasons of darkness.
It really does.
We tend to demand immediate answers for our suffering, but God operates on a timeline that spans centuries. He does not waste a single tear.
That brings it right down to the ground level. When I was reading this section, I found myself thinking about the quiet, seemingly insignificant acts of faithfulness we all do.
Yes, they everyday things.
Think about your silent endurance of pain on a random Tuesday when nobody is watching.
Yeah.
You get up, you care for a sick spouse, or you go to a job that drains you, and you honor God in the midst of a silent depression.
Right.
According to this book, those moments are pebbles hitting the pond. You might feel totally invisible, but your faithfulness in the dark is creating waves that God will use in sequences of history you cannot even fathom.
It is a stunning realization that strips away the lie of meaninglessness.
It entirely alters our perspective on daily life.
To understand this fully, we need to move into the specific life of John Bunyan and look at his defining work, The Pilgrim's Progress.
Let's do it.
The author makes a point to highlight the full title of the book, which is incredibly telling. The full title is The Pilgrim's Progress from This World to That Which Is to Come, delivered under the similitude of a dream wherein is discovered the manner of his setting out, his dangerous progression, and safe arrival at the desired country.
It is a mouthful.
It is, but I want you to notice that phrasing carefully. It is a dangerous progression. It is not a safe stroll.
Right.
It is not a casual walk in the park. For Bunyan, both in his actual life and in his fiction, the Christian life is fraught with peril. The book points out that the narrow way leads straight from the wicket gate to what Bunyan calls the hill difficulty.
Yes, the hill difficulty. The book actually provides a brilliant poem from Bunyan about this exact spot on the path.
I love this part.
Christian, the main character of the story, goes to a spring at the bottom of the hill. He drinks from it to refresh himself, which Piper is a reference to Isaiah 49, and then he starts heading straight up the steep incline. Listen to these words Bunyan wrote. The hill, though high, I covet to ascend. The difficulty will not me offend, for I perceive the way to life lies here. Come, pluck up heart that's neither faint nor fear. Better, though difficult, the right way to go, than wrong, though easy, where the end is woe.
So good.
I love that phrasing so much. Better, though difficult, the right way to go, than wrong, though easy, where the end is woe.
It sets up a stark contrast.
Piper draws a massive line between the persecuted Christianity of Bunyan's day and the modern Western Christianity of our day.
He really does.
Bunyan was agonizing over whether to gather for corporate worship at the cost of imprisonment and death. Meanwhile, the book notes that we in the West are agonizing over whether the kids should play soccer on Sunday morning.
It is a heavy critique of our current cultural moment.
It stings a bit.
Let's thoroughly examine the biblical normal versus the Western normal, because the argument presented is that we have come to see safety and ease as a literal right.
We really do.
We assume that if we are following God, things should be smooth.
Yeah.
If things get hard, we assume something has gone terribly wrong.
Right.
But the book walks us through a vast array of specific scriptures to prove that suffering is actually the normal state of affairs for the believer. Look at the words of Jesus himself.
Okay.
In Luke chapter 10, verse 3, Jesus says, he is sending us as lambs in the midst of wolves.
That is not a safe picture.
In Matthew chapter 10, verse 25, he warns about the maligning of the household, saying that if they called the head of the house Beelzebul, how much more will they malign the members of the household?
Right.
In John chapter 12, verse 25, Jesus speaks of hating one's life in this world in order to keep it to life eternal. And in Luke chapter 14, verse 33, he says that whoever does not renounce all that he has cannot be his disciple.
These are not comfortable suggestions.
No, they are core descriptions of the Christian reality.
I have to say, when I read the part about modern believers being soft, I bristled a bit at first.
That is a natural reaction.
It feels harsh. Nobody wants to be told they are thin-skinned. But then you look at the scripture Piper lays out, and it is impossible to argue with.
You cannot argue with the text.
He does not stop with the Gospels. He carries this straight through to Paul and Peter. Look at what Paul says in Acts chapter 14, verse 22. Through many tribulations we must enter the kingdom of God.
Many tribulations.
Not a few inconveniences, but many tribulations. In Romans chapter 8, verse 17, Paul says we are heirs of God and fellow heirs with Christ if indeed we suffer with him.
Conditioned on suffering.
And then Peter jumps in. In 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 12, he tells the believers not to be surprised at the fiery ordeal among them, as though some strange thing were happening to them.
Right.
The book literally states it isn't strange, it's normal. That is the message of the Pilgrim's Progress. The hill difficulty is the only path to heaven. There is no other.
That realization alone should completely reframe how we view our daily frustrations and our major tragedies.
It changes everything.
The author zeroes in on the symptoms of our modern culture, labeling us a soft and thin-skinned society. He lists out the evidence.
It's very specific.
He says we move away from bad neighborhoods at the first sign of trouble. We leave hard relationships because they require too much of us.
Yeah.
We do not go to dangerous, unreached people groups because we prioritize physical safety over gospel advancement. We fit far too well into what he calls a God-ignoring culture.
That phrase, God-ignoring culture, really stopped me in my tracks.
It is a strong phrase.
What does it actually mean to be God-ignoring in this context? Because I think a lot of people sitting in church on a Sunday morning would say, I am not ignoring God. I am singing the songs. I am reading the Bible.
Right, they feel they are engaged.
How does avoiding the hard path equate to ignoring God?
It comes down to how we view God's providence. When we avoid the hill difficulty at all costs, when our primary goal in life is simply to be comfortable and safe, we are essentially ignoring the mechanisms of providence that God uses to shape us.
I see.
The book brings in Hebrews chapter 12, verses 7 and 8 to tie this all together theologically. It says that suffering is as normal as a father disciplining a son.
Right.
The writer of Hebrews asks, what son is there whom his father does not discipline? If we are without discipline, we are illegitimate children and not sons.
That is a core Reformed understanding of God's fatherly providence.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The afflictions we face are not signs of God's absence. They are evidence of his parental involvement.
Mm-hmm.
The psalmist says in Psalm 34, verse 19, that many are the afflictions of the righteous. The plea here is for us to realize that avoiding suffering is avoiding the very tool God uses to prepare us for the celestial city.
We want the city, but not the preparation.
Precisely. We have become anxious, easily discouraged, and worldly because we prefer things that titillate for a moment but shrink our capacities for great joy.
Shrink our capacities for great joy. That is a staggering thought.
It really is.
By avoiding the hard path, by always choosing the easy way out, we are actually making our souls smaller. We are stunting our own ability to experience the massive joy that comes from trusting God in the dark.
That is spot on.
Bunyan's seasonable counsel to us is to take up our cross daily. He writes from a prison cell, having lost his freedom and the ability to provide for his family, and he says, the hill difficulty is better than the easy road.
He lived it.
And that leads us perfectly into the second figure in our discussion today. Let's look at William Cowper.
This section is so intense.
This section of the book is intensely fascinating. We move from a man suffering physical imprisonment to a man suffering mental imprisonment.
Right.
The author introduces William Cowper as a man who was severely sick. He wrestled with terrifying darkness. The book states he saw hell and terror, but he also saw heaven and ecstasy.
Cowper's life is one of the most heartbreaking and beautiful one of the most beautiful evidences to sustaining grace in the history of the church. He suffered from severe, agonizing bouts of clinical depression and melancholy. There were times when he believed he was entirely reprobate, completely cast off by God.
Just total despair.
Yet, in the midst of this overwhelming mental anguish, he wrote some of the most resonant hymns we have. The primary yield of Cowper's immense affliction is a call to completely free ourselves from trite, chipper, entertaining worship.
Right.
Because Cowper knew the depths of despair, his poetry had to have roots deep enough to reach a soul in the abyss.
The book provides a few stanzas from his famous hymn, God Moves in a Mysterious Way, and when you read them, knowing the agony he was in, they take on a whole new weight.
They really do.
Listen to these words. Ye fearful saints, fresh courage take. The clouds ye so much dread are big with mercy and shall break in blessings on your head.
Beautiful.
Blind unbelief is sure to err and scan his work in vain. God is his own interpreter, and he will make it plain.
God is his own interpreter.
It takes an immense amount of faith to look at a terrifying dark cloud of affliction and believe that it is about to break in blessings on your head.
Let's thoroughly unpack the book's critique of modern corporate worship here, because Piper uses a brilliant and heavy analogy to explain why Cowper's sturdy theology is so necessary.
Okay, lay it out.
He argues that if the Christian life has become a path of ease and fun in the modern West, then corporate worship simply becomes a place of increasing entertainment.
We see that all the time.
He writes that the real problem is not a battle between contemporary music and traditional hymns. People get so caught up in the style of the music, but Piper says that entirely misses the point.
Right.
The actual problem is that there aren't enough martyrs during the week.
Okay, stop right there. Not enough martyrs during the week. That is a massive statement. Break down the analogy he uses to explain that.
The analogy is this. If no soldiers are perishing during the week, What you want on Sunday morning is Bob Hope and some pretty girls to entertain you.
A USO show.
You want a USO show, you want to laugh, feel good, and be distracted. But if there is an actual war going on and people are taking massive casualties, you do not want entertainment. You want the army chaplain and you want a surgeon. Cowper understood that we are in a war, and his hymns act as the surgeon's scalpel and the chaplain's comfort.
That is such a vivid picture.
When you are bleeding out on a spiritual battlefield, a lighthearted joke from the pulpit is offensive. You need the heavy, sturdy truth of God's sovereign mercy.
That analogy of Bob Hope versus the army surgeon is just devastatingly accurate. And Piper lists out the specific, heartbreaking realities of the people who are sitting in the pews right now, this Sunday.
The real people.
He says there are William Cowpers in the congregation right now. He lists them out, and this part just broke my heart reading it.
It is heavy.
He notes there are spouses sitting next to each other in the pews who can barely talk to each other because the marriage is so fractured.
Right.
There are sullen teenagers living complete double lives at home and at school, terrified of being found out. There are widows who still feel the amputation of a 50-year partner sitting alone. There are single people who have not been hugged for 20 years. There are men in the prime of their lives dealing with aggressive cancer.
It is everyone.
There are moms who have carried tiny caskets to a graveyard. There are scarred soldiers of the cross. And then the author asks the most crucial question of the entire section.
What is that?
Shall we come to them with a joke?
Ouch.
It hits you like a ton of bricks.
Mm.
They can read the comics every day if they want to joke. They came to the sanctuary to find out if God is still on the throne in the middle of their agony.
It demands a serious reflection on what we are doing when we gather.
It really does.
Theologically, the book connects suffering directly to authentic worship. Piper defines worship as the display of the surpassing worth of God revealed in Jesus Christ.
Okay.
Therefore, being satisfied with God in the midst of suffering is the clearest possible display of his worth. He cites Psalm 63, verse 3, which declares that the steadfast love of the Lord is better than life itself.
Better than life.
When a believer is suffering intensely, yet still finds joy and satisfaction in God, they are demonstrating to the entire universe that God is more valuable than health, wealth, or even life itself.
That makes perfect sense.
That is why the author contrasts Cowper's sturdy, redwood-like theology of suffering with our modern sapling sermonettes.
I love that visual. A redwood versus a sapling.
It is very clear.
A sapling sermonette might make you smile on a sunny day.
Yeah.
It provides a little bit of shade, a little bit of green leaves, but it will snap in half the moment a real storm hits.
Instantly.
Cowper's redwood-like theology can withstand a hurricane. It has roots that go down into the bedrock of God's sovereignty.
Absolutely. And the stark reality is that until we suffer, we might not be interested in this kind of sturdy theology. We might prefer the sapling.
Because it is easy.
But as the book states, that day of suffering is coming for all of us. We do well not to wait until the affliction arrives before we learn the lessons of Cowper's great hymn.
We need to prepare.
We need to learn how to suffer well now, so that when the time comes, we will know how to live well and die well. The author even quotes Proverbs 31, verse 25, noting that the godly woman laughs at the time to come.
Laughs at the future.
This is not laughing at a trivial joke. This is laughing at the future because of a deeply rooted confidence in the sovereign providence of God. Faith-filled suffering is essential in this world for the most intense, authentic worship.
When I look at my own expectations for a Sunday service, it really challenges me.
Same here.
Are we walking into a sanctuary looking for bouncy, frisky smiles? Are we looking for lighthearted stories to make us feel comfortable and affirmed?
Right.
Or are we looking for the joyful earnestness that actually helps a broken heart feel hopeful? The book warns us that if we want entertaining worship services with the aim of just feeling lighthearted and friendly, it will never help a person prepare to suffer, let alone prepare to die.
It just will not work.
Cowper shows us how to sing in the dark.
It is a massive pivot from seeking a distraction from pain to seeking God in the center of the pain. And that requires a theology that does not flinch at the sight of blood or depression.
Yeah.
It requires a God who is big enough to ordain the storm and loving enough to pilot the ship through it.
That brings us perfectly to our third and final figure, David Brainerd.
Let's talk about Brainerd.
We transition from Bunyan's hill difficulty to Cowper's earnest worship, straight into Brainerd, and the radical mission outside the camp.
Right.
The material tells us that David Brainerd spent the last 7 years of his life literally spitting up blood.
Just awful physical suffering.
He died at the incredibly young age of 29 from tuberculosis. He spent his short adult life riding on horseback through the freezing wilderness of colonial America, sleeping in the damp cold, pouring himself out.
Giving everything.
His single driving passion was the salvation of sinners for the glory of God.
Brainerd's life is a masterclass in the theological mandate found in Hebrews chapter 13, verses 12 through 14. The book focuses heavily on this passage.
What does it say?
It explains that Jesus suffered outside the gate in order to sanctify the people through his own blood. Therefore, the mandate for the believer is to go forth to him outside the camp and to bear the abuse he endured.
Outside the camp?
Why? Because, as the scripture says, here we have no lasting city, but we seek the city which is to come. Brainerd lived that reality to the absolute physical limit.
He really did.
The author uses a highly visceral metaphor here. He says that when you are 29 years old and you have spent the last 7 years spitting up blood, you do not just casually recite the words, "Here we have no lasting city."
No.
You feel those words the way you feel the wind on a cliff's edge.
The way you feel the wind on a cliff's edge, I can almost feel that cold breeze reading those words.
It is a chilling visual.
And Piper points out human nature so accurately. Notice how many people feel that wind on the cliff's edge and immediately turn around and run inland to safety.
Most of us do.
We feel the vulnerability of life, we get a bad medical diagnosis, or we see a tragedy on the news, and our first instinct is to build a fortress of comfort. We try to insulate ourselves from the wind.
Right.
But the specific commands drawn from Brainerd's life are exactly the opposite. The book commands us to stop trying to make life lasting and luxurious.
Let go.
It commands us to let go of whatever holds us back from full and radical service. We are told to go outside the safe place, outside the comfortable place, and join Jesus outside the camp.
This is where the intersection of suffering and mission becomes crystal clear in Reformed thought.
Write that down.
Going outside the camp means leaving behind the security of the known and stepping into the affliction of the unknown for the sake of the gospel.
Yeah.
The book pulls no punches about the reality of this path. It describes Golgotha as a bleak hill, a skull with a frown of affliction on its face.
A frown of affliction.
But it immediately ties this back to the lyrics we just discussed from William Cowper. Behind a frowning providence, he hides a smiling face.
I love that connection.
The frown of Golgotha, the frown of suffering outside the camp, masks the smiling face of a sovereign God who is ordaining these events for his glory and for the salvation of sinners.
Look at the fruit of Brainerd's specific affliction. He felt like a failure much of his life. He struggled with severe depression alongside his tuberculosis.
He was a very tortured soul.
Yet, the text points out that his suffering resulted in the salvation of hundreds of Native Americans during his brief ministry.
Incredible fruit.
Not only that, but his journal, which was published by Jonathan Edwards after his death, became a trumpet blast over all the unreached peoples of the world.
It woke people up.
It awakened and inspired thousands of missionaries who came after him. The ripples from his short, agonizing life are still hitting the shores of eternity today.
And this brings us to an incredible paradox found in Psalm 16, verse 11.
What is the paradox?
The verse says, "In your presence is fullness of joy. In your right hand there are pleasures forever." But how does that intersect with the hill difficulty and spitting up blood outside the camp?
That is the big question.
The argument made here is that the path to everlasting joy actually leads right up the hill difficulty. It involves deep, joyful worship in the midst of suffering, and it pushes us out into an unreached world of perishing sinners.
So the joy is in the hard path.
Joy is found by taking this hard path. When one soul repents, the angels of God sing, and that produces a yield of affliction that lasts forever and multiplies all your joys in Christ.
Wow.
You do not find the fullness of joy running inland away from the wind. You find it standing on the cliff's edge, outside the camp, giving your life away.
This requires a massive shift in how we view our resources, our health, and our time.
An entire paradigm shift.
Brainerd did not view his failing health as an excuse to retreat into comfort. He viewed his brief, afflicted life as a resource to be entirely spent for the glory of Christ among unreached people.
He spent it all.
He echoed the single-minded passion of the Apostle Paul in Acts 20, verse 24, where Paul says, "He does not account his life of any value, nor as precious to himself, if only he may accomplish his course in the ministry he received from the Lord Jesus."
That is the heart of it.
Brainerd's suffering extends the shadow of the cross right into our modern, comfortable living rooms, and bids us ask if we can truly say, I am crucified with Christ.
It is a radical call. It asks us to look at our lives not as a collection of comforts to be protected, but as an offering to be poured out.
Poured out completely.
And when we pour it out, even in the midst of immense pain and sorrow, we are trusting that the sovereign God of the universe is catching every drop and using it to water the seeds of grace in fields we may never see.
So what does this all mean for us as we synthesize these three incredible lives?
Let's pull it together.
We have looked at three distinct but totally connected threads. John Bunyan shows us the absolute reality of the hill difficulty.
Yes.
He proves that the Christian path is a dangerous progression, not a safe stroll, and that suffering is the normal expectation for a child of God.
That is step one.
Then, William Cowper steps in and shows us how to actually sing with a sturdy, redwood-like faith in the middle of that very hill.
He gives us the song.
He provides the vocabulary for broken-hearted saints to worship God earnestly when the clouds of affliction are dark and heavy. And finally, David Brainerd shows us that climbing this hill with the gospel is the only way to reach perishing sinners for the glory of God.
He shows us the mission.
He calls us out of our luxurious, thin-skinned safety and demands that we go outside the camp to a world that desperately needs the truth.
If we connect all of this to the bigger picture, it leaves us with a necessary and heavy consideration regarding the hidden timeline of God's providence in your own life.
Give it to us.
We read about Bunyan's ripple effect touching a Chinese pastor centuries later. We read about Brainerd inspiring Carey and Carey inspiring Newton. Consider this for a moment. What if the most agonizing, confusing trial you are walking through right now is actually the specific pebble God is dropping into the water to sustain the faith of someone who will not even be born for another 100 years?
That is a staggering thought.
What if your current quiet endurance, the pain you are holding silently today, is the very thing that will eventually water the parched life of a believer across the globe?
You just do not know.
You may never see the shoreline where your way finally breaks, but blind unbelief is sure to err. God is his own interpreter, and in his unsearchable judgments, your affliction is actively working an eternal weight of glory.
I want you to really mull over that thought this week. Ponder these sovereign sequences. Look at your hands and think about the 10,000 effects of your faithfulness in the dark.
It changes everything.
We highly recommend picking up John Piper's The Hidden Smile of God to read these accounts for yourself. There's so much more in the pages than we could cover today.
Definitely read the book.
Thank you for joining us as the third person in the room for this deep dive into the source material. Keep resting in the sovereign providence of God, and we will catch you next time on Reformed Thinking.